Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Lisa. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out.
right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by a very special guest, Bazed Lit Analyzer. How you doing today, brother?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this, DPH. This is a real honor, a real privilege. So I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, thanks for coming on. You know, some of the people watching may know you from being a moderator here on the online community, but and that's how I knew you. And then recently, you've created a new YouTube channel called Bazed Lit Analyzer. And I was really impressed. I forgive me, I hadn't watched any of your stuff. I didn't know, just being wrapped up. And then Jerry and Allison and Rachel, those three people specifically told me, hey, you got to go watch Bazed Lit Analyzer's stuff. You're really going to love what he does. So, okay. And so Rachel was emphatic about me watching the Great Gatsby stream. So I went back to your channel. And for everybody watching, his link is in the video description. And mods, if you guys can share this link in the chat, everybody go subscribe to his channel. I was impressed. Very nice and in-depth quality. I loved it. And the multiplicity of literary references, really, really good stuff. I loved your channel, man.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you dropping in and seeing it and checking out my channel. And of course, shouts out to all my homies out there who supported me and have spread the word, especially Jerry and Based Homeschool Mom, Rachel Wilson. Shout out to ADH, to Jethro, to Nasky. Thank you, all my homies. Mixky, really appreciate you. Of course, shouts out to all the homies who are, of course, obviously big fans of you. So thank you.
Hey, I think we're all in this together, right? And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to freestyle. And again, I've watched your two most recent streams. You did a stream yesterday on Moby Dick that I thought was great. Really loved a lot of the Gnostic elements, the Luciferian, satanic elements in regards to a sort of Logos interpretation of Captain Ahab and a sort of distillation and embodiment of the American experiment that's kind of underway right now. So we're going to be diving into all this stuff, and we're going to be diving into literature in general. But I thought to begin, maybe we can just get into how you've acquired such a body of knowledge in regards to literary texts, novels, all this different stuff. Will you introduce to the people, assuming some people are going to watch, well, many people are going to watch this, they're not familiar with you or your channel, so they will go over, and we're going to, guys, go subscribe to Bazed Lit Analyzer. We're going to drive up his subs today and really promote the heck out of his channel. So just introduce yourself to anybody who may be interested in your content but not familiar with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my channel again is Bazed Lit Analyzer. Of course that the title of the channel was lifted completely from Jay, where he did a stream years ago where he put in there that he was the Bazed Analyzer. And so I just started and I put in literary because I just wanted to, our community here is so high IQ, and there's so much that's covered you and Tristan at Primal Edge Health, and of course Jay at Jay's Analysis covers so much, and there's such a body of material, a body of work going back for years. So I just decided, with help, by the way, from Jerry and from Jethro, who really pushed me to finally start a channel. I just thought I would find my own little niche and just try and cover what I love, which is literature. And I guess I don't, I've always loved reading. And I'm lucky. I'm fortunate. I'm blessed that I grew up with a great family who were avid readers. My dad has the biggest library of anybody that I know, and wow. Is a truly, he's the smartest person I've ever met. And my dad he reads, I don't know, probably 14 books a week.
Wow.
He's I won't say what he did for a living, but he has a breadth of knowledge that's incredible, and a photographic memory for history and for English and for economics. He's a cipher in math, all this stuff. So I was blessed wow. that he read to me from an early. I remember him reading to me when I was very young. I've always loved reading, and also I'm blessed that I had a great education, a classical private school education where the emphasis was on basically on the liberal arts, but on reading, analytical reading and writing, especially. And I always wanted to be a writer. And I went off to, I wanted to be a writer and an actor. Okay. So I thought that the most practical thing, this sounds completely impractical now, but the most practical thing to do would be to pursue acting. So I went to my first year of college on a theater scholarship in Memphis. And I decided when I was there that I would leave, and I moved to the UK, and I went to Queen's University in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And so I totally transferred over there, and I graduated a year early. And from there, I was either going to continue on for grad school in English, or I was going to audition for drama schools. So I decided to do the latter because I thought there's no way I would get in. So I auditioned for a couple of the big drama schools in the UK, and I made it a few rounds and got accepted into one particular that I chose. And it was an amazing experience that I'm not sure how to sum up, but I went from there into professional acting in the UK, and then for a year in New York. From there, I decided that actually that was the point where I decided that I hated everything to do with the industry and with acting in general. And to us looking at that now, it kind of seems like, well, duh, knowing what we know now. But this was at a point where I was like 24 years old, and it's what I wanted to do for a living. But I really saw a lot of things from the inside, and I hated it. And I decided to go back to grad school in Northern Ireland, and I went to school there for writing and literature. And then from there, I came back to America, and then years pass, and here we are. So yeah. But reading and literature has always been integral to my life. And I know we're probably going to talk about meaning as derived from literature and our different interpretations of literary works. Right. And that's something I'm really, really looking forward to.
Well, that's incredible. It sounds like, again, as Rachel said, you come by it honestly, with your dad being such a bookworm and having read so much. Different from my context, I'm kind of the only person in my family that has pursued this sort of weird lifestyle of just rapidly consuming books and reading and learning and somehow trying to convert that into some type of way to sustain myself in the world. But the background you have is really impressive in regards to your studies and everything. And it makes sense then. So the fellows here in the community, how did they know that you knew what you knew and to try to drive you into getting your own channel?
Well, I think a lot of that is thanks to you and to Jay and to Tristan. I mean, we're pretty lucky here in like our corner of the internet because from you with you guys being the content creators and us, being the viewers on the other side. It's amazing like how weird things progress. I mean, I remember the first stream that I watched of Jay, and it was Donnie Darko analysis. It was years ago. And that was like 2012 or 2014. And a lot of us have, there was no like such thing as a live chat back then. It was just, you watched videos, and there wasn't even live streaming. It wasn't live streaming. And then we sort of, eventually I remember the first live stream. And I remember at the time thinking, oh no, this isn't going to work. Please keep doing videos. And that was so long ago. And then I remember, but I didn't get involved. I didn't interact with anybody because I was just behind the screen, anonymous, watching content and whatever. Living my life as we kind of all were. And then when the quarantinqua happened, and everything was shut down, I remember thinking like, you know what, I'm just going to talk to somebody. And I remember getting into a chat, and then Jethro was the first person that I talked to. And then everybody, this community is so amazing and welcoming and genuine and high IQ and sweet, you know, and full of love that I just made a lot of friends. And that sort of progressed. And then, you know, and then I was talking to people on other platforms, and we just would converse and have conversations every day. And so eventually, like, you know, we all got to know each other. And then my friends here really pushed me to start this. So, and I'm very thankful for that, because, you know, I've only got, you know, a small little channel here, which I'm so thankful to everybody for being with me. And I can't believe that I have like as many views and as many people watching the streams as I do. It's really amazing. We've been going for about 2 months, and, you know, I hope to just keep doing it. It's fun. It's fun. And yes, also, yeah, I didn't mean to be a poser and copy you here with my denim jacket here. We all know that DPH is the style master. I just thought I'd throw on my jacket, my little, this isn't a John Deere hat, by the way. It's actually, if you look, it's a jackalope.
Oh, so, okay.
I don't know. It's an old skateboarding hat. So what?
Well, Tristan just hopped in and said DPH and Henley look like a country pop.
Right.
It's hilarious. Oh, man. So, okay, so let's just kind of get into it then. I mean, now people should be familiar. Again, guys, go subscribe to Bazed, B-A-Z-E. Here, let me put that up. I'll put it up later while we're talking here on the screen, but Bazed Lit Analyzer. And so before we get into some of your thesis and your interpretive lenses on things like the Great Gatsby, Moby Dick, I want to speak a little bit to literature, archetypes, words, language, and of course the Logos, the second person of the Holy Trinity, because really only Christianity is going to provide a real substantive interpretive understanding of what we're going to be diving into with this sort of undercurrent of meaning of great works. Why does literature matter? I mean, for many people, they would say aesthetics or quality. This is all subjective and relative. Our point, I assume you're going to be making as well, is no, this stuff is objective. And it's really fascinating that when you really just look at books, you know, I'm surrounded by books right here, that it's just words on paper. Words are the composite of letters. And yet at the same time, this reading, as you talked about with your father and yourself, it's like the mind traveling distances in a way. Like reading is the mind in motion, moving through space and time, but at the same time, space and time's collapsing as we read. You talked about in your Great Gatsby stream, you know, this is a work that was published, I believe, in 1925, and yet through, again, these words on paper, we have a glimpse into the mind of F. Scott Fitzgerald capturing a real moment in history with the 1920s and, you know, a new understanding of progress and wealth and, you know, the entrepreneurial moving west spirit in America. So it's so fascinating that reading is this phenomenon that we're engaging with language, and through language, you know, time falls away. So I'll leave this open, and then we can start going back and forth. You know, where's your approach to literature then? Because as anybody who watches your streams, the quality and depth of your interpretive lenses is that you've read a lot of different things, and you're bringing a lot to interpret. And of course, it's always rooted in a sort of Christian paradigm, and then Christ being the incarnated Logos is that sort of the ethereal, the eternal, the ideal meeting the actual material and temporal realm. Talk about a little, well, we didn't even get into your spiritual background, but talk a little bit about how all this stuff informs, you know, what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, well, that was great. I think that it's a big topic, but it's essential. That's pretty big. No, but it's essential to understanding literature, and literature is, in my view, literature is essential to understanding the human experience. And what I mean by that is that when you mentioned subjectivity and sort of the impressionistic idea of art, especially of literature, those things are important, obviously, and we're all individuals, and we have our own opinions about certain works, and we look at things and they appeal to our experience, our individual experience. But like you said, objective meaning is essential to understanding, or to having a worldview, first of all, the understanding of objective truth. And this is subjectivity and objectivity, or the sort of impressionistic versus the objective way of looking at literature, are sort of two sides. I don't mean that in sort of a dialectical sense, but they are two sides that are essential to producing meaning in work. And especially in my earliest streams, we started off with a lot of verse. We didn't get to prose until pretty recently. But when you look at verse, when you look at poetry, that's the whole purpose of poetry. Poetry is meant to be experienced. Verse is meant to be experienced in two ways. One is heard. It's meant to be heard. It's lyrical. It's auditory. And the other is seen on the page. I think that verse, especially, sort of crystallizes this idea of form plus content equals meaning. The way that things look, and the words and the subtext and the things that they say produce a meaning. And that meaning, a lot of times in literature now, especially with modernity, one of the points with a lot of modernist writers is that in their worldview, they will try and say that there is no meaning.
Right.
So, and that's obvious. And you can see that with visual arts. You can see that with
abstract
literature.
Expressionism. I mean, this is part of the postmodern turn, in which which comes out of literary theory in the academy. That's saying, and this is where we can see where Protestantism kind of falls apart, because it was actually Protestantism that gave rise to these interpretive lenses. That, how do we know what the objective meaning lying underneath any text, any written work is? Therefore, we are all reading into text. Literary theory then gave the foundation for then everything is an interpretive phenomenon, even my experience of the world, my interactions with people. And this is the sort of postmodern turn in the academy.
Yes, I think that my own lens, how I come at this through my education and my life and everything, is essentially that all art can be sort of boiled down to two things. And that's our relationship with God. Why are we here?
Right.
What's the point? What are we doing here? What's our deliverance? What's our salvation? And our relationship with each other, our interactions with other human beings. All art, to me, deals with those two things. And the question becomes whether the worldview expressed in a certain work or in an entire body of work is consistent with my own worldview, or whether it is true or false, whether it's ridiculous. But a lot of even the ridiculous in literature, when you, for instance, like you just mentioned, with abstract expressionism, or with absurdism, or with Dadaism, with surrealism, tries to show you that in the modern age, when you splash paint on a canvas in a violent manner and it's completely chaotic,
you're right,
that there is no worldview and that we're all in this cosmic soup. Now, that's not one that I agree with, obviously.
Right.
I think it's total. I was about to cuss there, but I'm not gonna, everybody.
I appreciate it.
I think that that's, let's say, sort of infantile and ridiculous.
Right.
But I do understand why the person did that in terms of, I can see what they are trying to show us. And I think it's important that, especially with literature, that there's no way for me to glean that information or that idea or that person's own understanding of reality if I don't know what they're saying in the first place. And ultimately, I think that, like you said, that there is no meaning without God. There is no truth without God. There is no, in all of literature, even when we read Moby Dick, for instance, and we have this sort of, it's almost an anti-God. It's a Gnostic Luciferian quest for revenge and meaning, but notice that it is still one person's quest for meaning. They are still trying to, Ahab his understanding of God is not correct, but he still has this vendetta in his own Gnostic purview that he can reach transcendence or enlightenment through fighting this demiurge character. And you can't really understand that if you don't have a Christian perspective or a Christian mindset when you're reading it.
Right.
And what we actually found at the beginning of yesterday's stream, which was incredible for me, because I've read all of Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom, everybody out there, if you don't know, you may not, and that's okay. Harold Bloom he's deceased now, but was the giant of American letters, especially of literary criticism and American literary criticism. He went to, he was a professor at Yale. Mm-hmm. He was the chair of the humanities department at Yale. And he is a complete 100% through and through Kabbalistic Gnostic. I mean, he all of his books are designed according to like the Sephiroth. Omens of Millennium is a Gnostic book. His book on Blake and the Romantic Poets, Fearful Symmetry, is a Gnostic book. The criticism that we read yesterday in his Genius is Gnostic. However, it was interesting to read that his views on the American experience and the American religion, what he called the American religion, are pretty consistent with what we see in our own corner here. That he said that the American religion is pretty much it's pretty much Gnostic. Yeah. And that's sort of without the American, he specifically talks about Pentecostals, et cetera, realizing that it is such. So there's still stuff to be gleaned from these people. And it's important to understand their criticism in their own body of work so that you can derive at your own. Right. If that makes sense.
And that's why I think steel manning oppositional arguments is so important to sort of intellectual maturity. And so, for example, you can look at Jacques Derrida, the father of deconstructionism, and sort of another postmodern prophet, and his whole move, forcing this, there is no thing behind the text, but then criticizing the phallogocentric structure, presupposition of Christianity, going all the way back before Christ into the Greek philosophical tradition. He's saying this is what we have to get away from, that this privileging of masculinity, this logos concept of objective meaning, objective truth, searching and finding these objective structures in reality, and then this idea of centering, that we all have to sort of, again, morality. There's an objective morality. We have to move towards the center of that structure. We need to look at feminism. We need to look at aberrant forms of sexuality. We need to look at marginality. We need to move in opposition to this phallogocentric structure. And looking and seeing his argument also helps me inform and understand my own place and my own understanding.
Right. Yeah. A lot of the things that you just mentioned there, the particular, a lot of them, if people are familiar with academia and the sort of trends in academia, especially, are sort of fads in which, for example, if you go to let's say if you went to a Wikipedia page on, King Lear or something, you're just an average person. You don't know what King Lear is. And you go to a Wikipedia page and you want a basic understanding of King Lear. Well, I'm not saying that you're going to get your best information from Wikipedia or not. I'm just saying that your understanding now would be that you would go there and you would probably see a heavy section on, for instance, the importance of femininity or the arguments about the patriarchy in King Lear. And the fact is that you may get some information out of that, and you may be able to glean some truth out of literature, but a lot of the things that we see now are sort of passing fads in terms of looking at what literature means, in terms of meaning. It's a false meaning. It's a meaning in terms of whatever the current, socio-political fad is, the arguments against the patriarchy.
Right.
But people need to be able to dig deeper. And the only way to dig deeper especially into like a massive work, like for instance, King Lear or Hamlet, is to look at the words on the page, break them down, discuss how they interact with one another, and decide whether this work answers some of the essential questions of life, right? Whether it captures the human experience in a truthful way. And I think that's one of the problems, especially with modernity and with that's why, literature now, the literature that's being produced is so bad. I mean, look at movies, for example.
Right.
We know there's been like this desert of movies over the past couple of years.
They can't make anything original anymore.
They can't make anything original. And as there's like 7 tropes with all movies that are made. And, and Jay's talked a lot about how movies continuously like recycle this sort of Gnostic paradigm in their movies. It's over and over. Another one is The Most Dangerous Game, that occurs like in 3/5 of the movies that come out now. That one's interesting on its own, because I think that one hints at sort of the revelation of the method, or the sort of, we start to understand that, we're not only watching this movie about, people hunting each other, but we are the prey watching it.
Right.
And so that we can get something from that. But other than that, it's interesting that there's no sense of like bravery in terms of like actually being intellectually brave in the work that's produced now. And the only way you can be brave now is by talking about something in terms of either a Christian lens or talking about objective truth, objective meaning, Christ, and those things that come out are so far, few and far between, because the illusion, the cover thing is, we're going to have this movie about, like for instance, I went back this weekend and I watched that movie Moonfall. And it is interesting that like, I watched this movie just imagining that I was someone else watching the movie and going, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And I've learned something about, AI and the moon and, aliens or whatever. And wow, this is pretty cool. And then leaving and immediately forgetting it, but thinking that I've discovered some sort of truth.
Right.
And anyone with any sort of discernment is watching this going, okay, this is absolute trash. I mean, it's fun, but it's fun because it's so stupid. It's fun because it's trash. It's just nothing new.
Well, in that takeaway, that's what makes great literature great, is the ability to read something and you're actually transformed by it. And this is where, again, I know reading Moby Dick or The Great Gatsby, these aren't necessarily transformative life events. They could be, I guess, from a degree, but every time you're reading, every time you're engaging with the word, unless it is in this sort of haphazard, relativistic way, the only way that it's is worthwhile is that it has something there that you're confronting, you're taking away, and you, in a way, you really are transformed by it. And that's why reading and diving into books and making reading a serious habit is so essential for the mind. I've done streams talking about the literacy rates, and within the last 5 years, and they are on the decline. Like literally, we're becoming less and less literate every single year, which is going to make us more malleable, easier to be, duped into various other agendas. Won't get into any specifics, but reading is essential for critical thinking. The ability to read something again and take that as objectivity, and then reinterpret, glean things from it, compare it to other things you've read. This is part of the ability to critically think. And as we're talking about reading the postmodern, Aristotle talked about, the sign of an educated mind is to be able to hold two opposing ideas at the same time.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting you mentioned, first of all, reading as an activity, an activity in terms of action, right? And active thing that especially adults do. And the other is this sort of classical Greek concept of reading or of knowledge. And I think that in terms of reading, Ezra Pound in ABC of Reading and Bloom in How to Read and Why, they both talk about how reading is an activity there's nothing else that takes the place of reading. No. It's like you said at the beginning, we have this book here and, we've got these two, like we had a tree and then we made it into these sheafs of paper and then we printed these weird symbols on it.
Yeah.
Right. And somehow your mind looks at the page and then you stop looking at the page and deciphering the symbols on the page. And then you get into this sort of activity where it takes you onto the next page and onto the next page. And you're living this, your imagination or your mind is living this other life. It's like what, Coleridge called the willing suspension of disbelief, right? It's like with Shakespeare, which is that if you go to a play or if you watch a film, but if you go there, you are always aware that you're sitting in a seat and you're watching human beings like on a stage pretending, right? They're like saying words and they're like doing, sort of awkward actions and they're wearing costumes. And that's literally what you're doing. But somehow your mind suspends its disbelief and you start to go into the things that they're saying and what are they doing. And there's this other life, and the other life is if it's a great work, is your own life, right? It appeals to your own life. It may not even be, if we only read works of literature for what we have experienced in life, and that's sort of one of the things in education is like trying to sell works of literature to whatever the student body is, whatever level that will appeal to their experience. Well, most people haven't had much experience.
Right.
So what you want to do is, it's not a sense of escapism, but it's a sense of like, there's something bigger. There's a bigger life.
Well, and speaking on that experience, again, that there is a reality that exists. And again, and so from our understanding as Christians, that is the Logos, that is the Word of God, that the Trinity, the Father spoke the world into existence through the second person, through the Word, through the Logos, through the structure of logic and reason and truth and all these different things. And that is what constructed this world. And so reality itself is the Logos. Literature is this ability for us to participate in this activity of language and then reiterate reality itself through fictional landscapes. And so it's then encountering these fictional landscapes, but in the sense you're also countering reality because it has to be based on that living reality.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing with fiction, especially because you're not only, there are so many different levels and layers to what you're doing, right? Yes, you're looking at the page. Yes, you're sort of deciphering these symbols on the page. You're sitting in a chair doing this. Then you're going into the story. Then you're imagining like a bigger experience. But with fiction, there's this whole other level to it because you're also always aware that what you're reading is made up. Somebody literally sat there and made up the story, right? Mm-hmm. How is it supposed to appeal to our mind at all? And I think it's almost a miracle in a sense, right? That we can glean truth. We can understand what life is or what life is supposed to be from a story that somebody made up.
Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but this is a book, like for instance, with The Great Gatsby, this is a book that I don't particularly like. I don't, not only do I not like it in terms of my own like personal feelings about the book, but I also, there's nobody in the book that's likable. There's nobody that's virtuous. There's no one that particularly shows that they believe in anything.
Yeah. There's no redemptive figure. There is no Christ archetype, right?
There's really no redemptive figure. Yeah. Right. There's no redemptive figure in this. There's no, the only salvation, for instance, that Nick has, the protagonist, Nick Carraway, is that he runs away at the end.
Right.
Right. His friend, who we realized when we read the book, again, is not his friend in any way. He doesn't like Jay in the book, Jay Gatsby. And in fact, he shows like a strong contempt for them, which mirrors their own contempt for him, but it's sort of an unspoken contempt.
Right.
And then his friend gets killed. Then there's an SUICIDE by the guy who killed him. And then he leaves and he goes back west, right? He retreats to the west instead of, because one of the themes of the book obviously is East Egg, West Egg. East Egg represents, in the sort of the normie interpretation of the book is that East Egg is old money, West Egg is
which is still a reality in the world right now. Silicon Valley, the West, the West Coast,
absolutely,
it's still a reality.
Absolutely. Yes, and I think that's one of the things that we got from that book in particular is that even though, and this is actually what I do like about the book. One thing that's brilliant about this book is that it's a great example of writers doing what Ezra Pound said great writers do, which is show, not tell. And so we have to have discernment and read the subtext of the novel, which is showing us that there's so much in the book that's unspoken.
Right.
It's elliptical. It's like, it's illusory. And that is one of the themes of the book, that a lot of their reality is an illusion because there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And that we get an idea of the power structure through the book, that a power structure that still exists.
Right.
And we see in the book that the West Egg and East Egg, the new money and the old people and the old money are two sort of symbiotic branches of a power structure that mix further up the food chain, but they don't mix in their own society. Right. Right. So for example, in the book, when Nick Carraway goes with Jay Gatsby, and he takes him to like a speakeasy, in the film, he takes him to a speakeasy, and the film doesn't really but neither of the films really get the book. Right. Because it's a little too impressionistic for a film version. And I think that he goes to a speakeasy and he's introduced to this guy, Meyer Wolfsheim, who is obviously supposed to be a Meyer Lansky, Arnold Rothstein combination. Yep. And I discussed this in the stream. They're talking about, he says, Nick says, who's that guy? And right away, even that question shows you that he doesn't fit in. Right. Because he's asking, a lot of the introductions in the book are just like in American Psycho. Bret Easton Ellis did this in American Psycho, where it's like there's mistaken identity. People don't ask what other people do for a living if they are in the East Egg part. They're part of the old power structure, and really they don't really do anything. Right. All they do is run the organization or whatever. Yeah. And he says to him, "Oh, that's the guy that fixed the 1919 World Series." And Nick is like, well, how is he still walking around? How is he? And he's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, he didn't get arrested. And he's like, no, that's not even a question, man. They can't get him. Right. And it's so, and then we find out later in the book that Jay Gatsby and Tom Buchanan have this guy in common, which is this guy, Walter Chase, in the book, who's obviously supposed to represent like Chase Manhattan. Right. And the guy at the head of one of the big four banks in America has run out of money and goes to the trafficker mafioso for money, for funding. But that in their own society, that's like unspoken. They can't talk about that. So I think that this book gives us a glimpse into, like I said, a glimpse into a power structure that still exists, and really also gives us a glimpse into like the way that human beings interact when they're not really interacting with one another, if that makes sense. There's a scene where Jordan Baker in the book says, she says, oh, they're all sitting around, just lounging around. And she says, oh, we should plan something. Isn't that what people do? They plan things. And it's like such a simple, like such a 2-sentence part in the book. But Fitzgerald is showing us right there that these people don't exist like where they plan day-to-day things. They're sort of mimicking they're mimicking humans and what they should be doing, but they don't really have to do anything. Tom can fly away to the south of France whenever he wants. At the end, when the murder happens, they just take off. They take off to Monte Carlo.
Right.
And there's no meaning for them.
Well,
there's no
responsibility. There's a lack of responsibility and accountability,
right.
Which is then again full circle. Then again within Christian purview, sin, judgment. That life itself is actually based upon this concept of responsibility and meaning and pursuing and that is what maturity is, right? So as we mature, we take on more and more responsibility in our lives, and rising to that occasion of fulfilling the responsibilities we have brings in further and deeper meaning into our lives. And we see again, so it's showing how at the top echelon, that's why they're committing adultery and buying things in the lavish lifestyles, because the lack of responsibility of this old money world creates a sort of decrepit person that can't be satiated, and they live a basically sinful life.
Yeah, I think that you hit on a really good point there, which is that there's certainly no responsibility. There's no sense of accountability. There's no sense of, not only is there no sense of accountability like to one another,
right? In
terms of like
truthfulness, honesty, integrity.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
Right. There's no, their ideas of truth, integrity, and virtue, if they even consider such a thing, are things that are like in the immediate now, right. and they're all emotional. They are not spiritual. They're not intellectual. Right. They have nothing bigger than their immediate experience.
Yeah, and they're trapped by the present. Trapped by the present moment, which is the sort of the satanic historical agenda, right? To get us trapped in the immediate moment of our own passions and sense experience.
It's exactly right. In fact, in Moby Dick, there's that great scene where Ishmael says, all that Ahab did was feel. Right? He's pure emotion. He's pure feeling. He's pure emotion. He's pure driving on the spite of his immediate now. Right? What was it in? That's we talked about in the intro to that one, how interestingly enough, Ahab is searching for the white whale, and continuously in the book, obviously Melville draws parallels between the white whale and Leviathan. Right. And it's purposefully biblical. Right. And how I didn't actually know this before I read Bloom's introduction, that the 5 points of the Leviathan, Satanist Baphomet sigil have they have a Hebrew letter. Right. And it's Leviathan. It spells out Leviathan. I didn't know that. And that makes sense. That sort of ties it makes sense on so many levels, because Ahab is he not only doesn't care, he's not only unaccountable to his crew, obviously. Right. But he sort of supersedes them and lords over them in the same way that Melville writes the idea of the character himself. So whenever we literally get Ahab on deck, he's this huge presence, right? Also, there are a number of times in the book where like he's always described as like having, wielding lightning, or like with a volcanic temperament, pure
satanic imagery. I mean, scripture again. Yes. The shoe of little Nas was about Luke 10, talking about how Christ saw Satan fall like lightning.
Right, and not only that, but he's the way that for most of the book he looms as this unseen presence, because he only appears at certain times on the deck, and he's there constantly at the end of the story, right? Because he spots the white whale, and he goes into these like sort of magnificent Shakespearean soliloquies, which are purely biblical, right? In terms of their diction, because he purposefully uses a sort of a quasi like Old Testament way of having Ahab speak, which is different from the other characters on the ship. He has him saying, there are a lot of ye's and thous, and he speaks purely archaically.
Right.
And that's supposed to mimic like that he is this, Ahab's own idea of the demiurge and all this stuff. But the fact that he is this unseen presence for the rest of the trip really like points to this unseen terror, and the fact that the rest of the ship, like on their whole experience, there's this fear and this terror that they have. In fact, they even specifically say, what does Bloom say? That it's fear and trembling, right? It's fear and trembling on the deck of the ship. And of course that stands for like, you could write some lame critical analysis of the book and talk about how that represents like capitalism and the various like, the melting pot of America and all that stuff. And like, those are true. Those are probably true. Those are different aspects of it, but they also don't point us to something. They don't point us to something pure.
Well, it's not a moral compass.
Right.
We can find a hermeneutical lens that understands the multiracial, multi-ethnic enterprise of the American experiment, the commercialism. And I loved in your stream you talked about how Captain Ahab, he's not driven by money. And this is where I think this, even though ironically, the us being led by money and worshiping Mammon allows us to fall into a sort of inverted pyramid where Satan or the evil one is certainly at the top of it, but he's totally driven by the monomaniacal obsession of the great will, and it's all about death. He's obsession by death, but it's also a reflection of himself, and this pride is, again, the recapitulation of the original sin of how Lucifer falls into the entity of Satan. I mean, it's through the worship of oneself, and really Ahab, in a way, is worshiping his own self in the pursuit of the white whale.
Yeah. It's interesting that, bringing that up, it's interesting that the last three prose works that we've analyzed all deal with that. They all deal with characters who are not motivated by money. They're not motivated by monetary gain. They're purely motivated by something darker.
Mm-hmm.
We have Captain Ahab. Then we had Gatsby. Now Gatsby, one would think that Gatsby is motivated by money because on the surface he's motivated by money.
Right. The new money.
Right. And the narrative tells us that he's got the biggest library. He's got all the cars.
Yeah. Throws the best parties.
That's right. Throws the best parties. Of course, the cars. In the descriptions of the cars are all like have a reflective and like this broken prismatic quality where the windshield sort of like shoots a mirror into whoever's looking, and it sort of like it like fractures.
Yeah.
And then when he throws the best parties, well, no one knows him. No one knows him at his own parties.
Right.
He's like unknowable, and nobody knows anybody else at any of the parties. And it's full of just like these sort of demon-esque, like ghost, weird creatures who live purely for the moment, live on the weekend, and don't have any. They have no concept of like you said, there's no deliverance. And then and Tom Buchanan, who is he's the villain of the book, even though they're sort of all villains. Tom Buchanan, who also has no meaning, no responsibilities, no connections to anybody else, and is certainly not motivated by money. In fact, he doesn't even have a concept of money. In fact, when Nick first gets to the Buchanan's house, Nick says, "Oh yeah, I'm working in the bond business." And my mic
I got it. It's
okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Sorry about that. He says he's motivated by the bond business, or he works in the bond business. And Tom says, "Oh, where do you work?" And he mentions his firm. And Tom's like, "Oh, I never heard of it." It's like he's completely above this. When he says, "Oh, it's a pretty nice house, right?" And his house is like half a mile long to the beach. And he's like, "Oh yeah, it's pretty good. I got it from that oil man, Rockefeller or whoever."
Yeah.
It's not a thing to him. And then in Frankenstein, which we read before that, it's the same thing. You have a character who is he's unmotivated by, he has no interest in money. He actually has no interest in, the book is on its surface is supposed to be about like, there's this doctor who's interested in science and he wants to pursue science and, but really, genius. Yes, but really he's motivated by, he wants to live forever. He wants to break the bonds of death.
Sounds
and
familiar.
He wants to do it through his own creation.
Right.
Right. And he self-experiments. And I don't look at literary works as having morals. I don't, as having like trying to take a moral from the story or having any sort of, a lot of these books have no, like you said, no moral compass. But if we're going to get anything from Frankenstein, it's the fact that this guy is in this so-called noble pursuit, but his activities are all infernal. They're all decrepit and decadent, and he self-experiments on himself. He fractures his own mind, and then at the end of the book, he sinks into the abyss.
But it does have a moral, not that the author, Mary Shelley does, or she's putting that into the book. It's that, again, this concept of logos. It's the hermeneutical, it's the exegetical techniques of what is truth, using that as the lens. So, all these different, queer theory or whatever it is, a different hermeneutical lenses. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of different stuff. But when we bring the most truthful one, which is Logos itself, we see this thing recapitulate itself in the present moment with Silicon Valley and transhumanism and these sort of new understandings of what it means to be a man or a woman or biology, and this mixing with our own creations, which are created in our own fallen image. Right. And this idea, so it's like, well, I want eternal life, but I don't want it by following the morality and the life of Christ, the teachings of Christ, God, eternality entering into the person, historical human flesh. I want it through my own endeavors, and this is where that Gnostic enterprise of sort of escaping reality, escaping, again, the logos, escaping that which is real. And that's where, again, the Gnostics had a totally different understanding of the God of the Old Testament, which totally changes the way they understand creation itself as inherently evil, not inherently good. And so it's like, yes, the authors don't put them in there, but the reason why they stand up as great texts throughout time is because they do glean truths when we use the correct hermeneutics to actually look at these texts and see what they're saying.
Yeah, one interesting thing that I just thought of when you brought up that point was that early on in the stream, we looked at, I don't know why, but I just decided to look at Ralph Waldo Emerson and some of his essays. And maybe it's because, I don't know, you and Jay had just been talking about transcendentalism before that. And I don't know, I thought of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's another example of where, especially in the American, in the American system, we sort of hold up, not we, but we people, education, media, culture,
society.
Society, hold up Ralph Waldo Emerson as this, monolithic giant of early American letters and the perfect expression of what it means to be American. And he synthesizes all that we should aspire to.
Right.
And that was part of everyone's, education, certainly mine. But I went back and read some of Emerson, and immediately, like looking at, I think it was Nature, how he clearly states in his essays that when he's talking about transcendentalism and his ideas about transcending the bounds of what it means to be human, he talks about I'm the transparent eyeball, right? I see all, I am all. We're all one, man. And he says, he came out of church and he was questioning what he'd heard, I guess, during a sermon. Okay. All right. So he's thinking about it. But then he says, like, one of the old parsons comes up and says, and makes a point to him. And Emerson says, yeah, but why is whatever it was, why is it such? And the answer that the guy gave him, which is not great, is like, listen, man, that's what we read and that's what you should say. And you can't say otherwise. Okay. But then that drives Emerson to say, oh yeah, well, my ideas about life are pure feeling and communion with nature and the transcendent idea of humanity. And if I got that from Satan, then so be it, he says. I couldn't believe that he literally says this in the essay.
Right.
And again, most people say, read this and go, oh no, man, it's metaphorical. It's figurative. Okay. But is it? Right. And if you this goes to the idea of like, this is the big problem with the atheistic worldview, which is that if you're going to say that you derive meaning from data, right? If you get meaning from empirical data, then why are you using metaphysical language?
Right.
Right. Why are you using the language of value or better, or that somehow life or humanity will get better? What's your paradigm? How can you say that if everything's numbers, right? If everything is
it's measurements and averages. Exactly.
If there's no spiritual system, if there's really what it boils down to, right? If you don't believe in God, right, and you believe in the cosmic soup, and you believe in the what do they call it? The slime. If we came from slime and pond scum, then what's your value? So it's hard. I don't know. I think that's one of the great things that we've gotten, like in looking at this in my sort of when we keep analyzing these works, is we keep going back and finding that a lot of the things that we read, especially if you read them as kids, in terms of your education, a lot of things that we've read are a lot different than how you remember them.
Right.
And maybe it's that it takes discernment. Maybe it takes it, you have to be older. Maybe you have to, to have found God, right?
Well, I would say both those, without, there's plenty of people that have life experience that are reading these same old texts, and they're not gleaming the same archetypal patterns and realities and truths that we are. I think it is tied to a sort of paradigm that we are situated in as we encounter the text. Also, I think it is tied to life experience and encountering reality in the way it actually is. And so why is it that new money and old money or Silicon Valley and transhumanism and the love of self or the love of power and create, why is it that it follows these patterns of...
Go ahead.
I just want to highlight again, even that reference you were talking earlier, it's like that is part of literature and reading and all the works. I mean, even within Moby Dick, Herman Melville's referencing Aristotle and Plato and all that literature and reading, fiction and nonfiction, is a historical, continual conversation. And so as people don't read, as again, this faculty of the mind is, lessened. And even Marshall McLuhan theorized that, as we moved into the digital age, that people are going to become less literate, and that we're going to become more susceptible to their passions because everything is going to become instantaneous, because we're going to live into an electrical global village, that in a way you're seeing it. And so people aren't participating in that historical conversation that Melville, and he's writing about, Ahab and a white whale and a ship, and yet at the same time he's bringing in an entire conversation that's running through it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And McLuhan and understanding media, I think when I think of McLuhan, I always think about how amazing it is that he predicts a lot of the postmodernism and the postmodernist sort of system that's pushed. A great example, by the way, of postmodernism, dealing with exactly what you just said, with people who aren't engaged in reading, people who are sort of living by the electrical nodes in their phone.
Yes.
a great example of that that's dramatized is in Don DeLeo's book, White Noise. I ought to cover that. White Noise is a 1985 book that won I think it won the Penn Faulkner Award.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. Don DeLeo is like, it's kind of like Don DeLeo and what's the other guy's name? Gravity's Rainbow guys who wrote Pynchon, Thomas Pynchon. Thomas Pynchon, yeah, Thomas Pynchon and Don DeLeo are sort of like two pillars of postmodernism in American literature.
Yeah,
but Don DeLeo wrote his tome is called Underworld, but his great book, he's still writing. His great book is White Noise, and White Noise is so the language of the book, everything in the book is you remember that scene in The Wolf of Wall Street where if you've seen The Wolf of Wall Street, where Leo is eating lunch with Matthew McConaughey, and he first introduces him to the firm.
Yeah.
And Matthew McConaughey says, "Listen, man, you know it's all digits and numbers. You know, you got to let loose, right?" Well, that is White Noise, because everything in the book is like filled with this sort of Xerox electrical static diction.
Yeah.
And what happens is there's a professor of, let's just say, a certain World War II figure studies at a university. So he's essentially a nihilist anyway. And there's what you call an airborne toxic event in the town. And it's a nameless, nebulous sort of like weird, like Oort cloud of government sponsored, like ionized chemical spray that occurs over the town. And everybody starts to sort of lose their mind and go crazy. And the main character, the book is funny. It's hilarious, but it's funny because of its absurdity. And the absurd aspect of it is the fact that we see that clearly this character is completely nihilistic, completely sees no meaning in life, and sort of then realizes, like he becomes self-conscious and realizes that, oh, now I realize that there's no meaning in life. There must be meaning in life. So yeah, I think that I don't know how did I get on that train? How did I get on that little train? Yes. Postmodernism.
We were talking about white noise and the ability that the historical conversation of reading and the inability of people to read is they're not participating in the historical conversation of.
That's right. And you mentioned the phones and the disconnect and
McLuhan and how he talked about an electronic global village that's going to reset the sensory ratios of mankind back to a pre-literate world. He saw that electrical technology, because it's watching and it's hearing and it's not the hot medium of reading, that reading is an activity that you're literally stationary, not doing anything, and yet it's a very active process. He called this a hot medium as opposed to a cool medium, and a cool medium is something that you can sit there passively and still acquire the information.
Right.
And so I think people in the lack of literacy and people not being able to read and the difficulty, and then as you participate in this white noise, as you're talking about, it makes it actually more difficult. I've noticed it with myself. When I have to do a lot of reading or writing, it's very difficult. If I've been on social media a lot that day, my mind, it's like I need to sit down, I need to write something, and then I'm there for 15 minutes, and all of a sudden I'm checking my phone again, or somebody emailed me, I never got back to them. Then I'm like going back to, it's like the mind is bouncing around to all these different things, where reading is taking, and it's a prolonged activity of effort. So anyways, we were talking about that general concept, the historical conversation, and then electronic technology.
Right. Yeah, I think that yes, the airborne toxic event in the book stands for now would signify the overarching problem of the 5G tower, the Starlink satellite, the all-encompassing technology. One activity, if you're watching this, one activity that you might want to, I'm not giving advice or anything, but I'm saying one activity just to test yourself, to sort of gauge where you are in terms of this in terms of this like technological McLuhan society is just like sometime, first of all, find a piece of paper. Okay. Find a piece of paper and a pen and try and write down what you've done that day. Okay. Just write a 1-page account to yourself of what you've done that day. And I guarantee you, it will be a lot more difficult than you think it is. First of all, we live on a screen or on a keyboard. And I'm not saying, I'm not giving like boomer advice and saying like, well, you ought to be back in the day and writing with a pencil, young man. I'm saying, try to do something active, a mechanical motion with your hand. Yeah. You did this. You did this your whole life up until a certain point.
I mean, millennia.
And then try and write what you did that day in a way that is concise and that, don't try. You're not trying to like write a poem or write a story or write a diary entry. Just look at how much technology and the sort of everyday system in which we find ourselves has stifled your ability to put clear thoughts on a piece of paper.
Right.
It's one thing to speak, right? It's one thing to talk and to speak. It's another thing to like create, to write, to write a poem or write to write a stream, to write a script, to write a report, but try to do something personal and see if it's hard or difficult. Because I find myself, I write all the time, and I am constantly finding that like, I don't think that my like technology usage is like, abnormal or anything. I'm just like a normal dude, but to write down, and I've done that day in terms of writing something concise and that's intelligible, right? And, is pretty difficult. And I think it, like you said, reading is this activity, reading and writing as a counterpoint to, for instance, like video games. Mm-hmm. When a person plays video games, you can get sucked into this thing where you're playing all day and it's passive. Right. All the images are being thrown at you and you're taking a role in whatever you're doing, but reading is the exact opposite. You're having to take an active role in what you're doing.
Right.
So,
yeah. And, and just the ability to connect, I think this is part of the fragmentation of the mind. So you talked about, again, the broken glass symbolism in the Gatsby. You talked about,
yeah, what just said?
What is going on with the stream here?
I don't know. Wait, that's not me.
I'm showing perfect on Streamlabs. That's strange.
Oh, there we go. Oh, that was crazy.
Huh.
That's Gil Bates. We're being attacked. Listen, folks. All right, I'm not bragging, but wherever I go, Gil Bates is always attacking me.
Okay, looks like it's back normal. I have no idea what happened. I tell you guys, it's like whenever same thing with, it was like with Father Turbo. We're having a great conversation. All of a sudden the stream goes out. I swear technology is like a battlefield for the demonic. Anyways, we're back. It looks like everything's all good on my end. It's still showing the same as it was when it was all broken up. Anyways, I feel like the reading and writing is the ability to sustain one's own mental activity for a prolonged period of time is part of like this fragmented memory of people, again, and so we're becoming more and more like a sort of hamster on a hamster wheel, because people, as the society can't remember, and the society can't remember because it's also not participating in that historical conversation. That is the point. It's not that everybody has to be a Platonist. It's that you need to read Plato and know Aristotle because of the effect it's had in this historical conversation. When I did a stream with Dyer, that's what we were talking about. Philosophy is a conversation. And so, you have to understand how every philosopher, it can be the Enlightenment, John Stuart Mill, Immanuel Kant, they're referencing and working off everything that was developed before the modern world that we live in. And really the fragmentation of culture, the fragmentation of truth, the fragmentation of everything is that the fragmentation's also in people's minds. And so we have to get back to these more traditional forms and blend it. I mean, at the same time, like you're saying, woods and get off the internet. You can't do that either. As much as you don't want your CBDC, is, and in that building of boundaries, yeah, you get on the internet and you do X, Y, Z, and then you can also you read, you write.
Yes, discipline, intellectual discipline, obviously physical discipline, but intellectual, mental discipline, religious discipline is something that is so foreign to the status quo nowadays. And I think, well, for a long time, but especially now. And I think that, speaking of philosophy, yeah, you guys made a great point, and Father Deacon made a great point in his stream last night with Jay, which was that, when you're discussing philosophy, that Descartes is built on by, oh, here we go again. Wow.
What is going on? I
Yeah, I
have no
don't know.
idea. This is even different than it's ever done before. It's never done exactly what it's doing now. I have no idea. Now it's saying
That's crazy, folks. Listen. All right. So, but yeah, in terms of philosophy, Descartes and then Kant, Hume, and you have this continuous one building on another. And I think that it's the same in literature in a sense, in that, the referencing another work, that the whole point, one of the points of great literature and what, in the canon of literature is that it's supposed to mimic the mind's processes, and it's supposed to mimic the world, right? Which is that it's kind of what, T.S. Eliot is he's no
Orthodox saint.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. But T.S. Eliot, continuously refers to the landscape of literature, which is to say that, the world is the interconnectedness, experience, and intellectual and religious life has to play a role in great literature. Things have to reference, you have to have allusion. Things have to allude to other things. You have to have something that is supposed to signify or mimic the experience of being, of communion. So, yeah, I don't know, man. Listen, folks, it's really going here. Okay, I've never seen it like this before. We're going to need you to send in some Streamlabs to DPH. Okay, listen, send in your super chats via Streamlabs to DPH. Church of the Eternal Logos. We're trying to keep this operation running here. It depends on you.
Dude, I don't even get it. I don't even get it. Yeah, somebody said that the visuals are postmodern. Yeah, they definitely are. Yeah. I have no idea why it's doing that. And now it's saying it's not receiving enough information. It'll say that it's perfect, and then anyways. Oh, we're just gonna keep powering on through, and I don't know. You can't restart it. We're already midstream. Oh,
hard. Yes, says Jeff. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's definitely not the internet, so I have no idea what is happening. I think we're being spiritually attacked. Anyways. Okay. So let's get back then to some of your analysis that I've watched recently, such as let's dive into Moby Dick a little bit and the profundity of Moby Dick. What's your kind of thoughts? What's the thesis of Moby Dick that you put forth over on your channel? And then I got a lot that I'd want to bounce off of. I was thinking, there's stuff I listened to, The Great Gatsby and Moby Dick. There's a lot of, I was like, oh, we got to talk about this, and this. So just for the people, lay out, summarize, if you can, some of what you're talking about with Moby Dick, Melville, and your general framework for that, and we can dive into everything.
I guess my general framework, especially for Moby Dick, would be that we have this novel that sort of comes out of in a few ways. It comes out of nowhere. It certainly comes out of the typical source material, which is like it comes from a Massachusetts, Bedford, Massachusetts, northeasterner, but he's more of a gentleman without means in the like Byronic sense. He's not the typical Emersonian elite. And we have this great American novel in 1851 that sort of comes out of nowhere, in the sense, poetically, I guess, that the white whale comes out of nowhere. He comes out of the literal abyss, right? And I think that my interpretation of the book would be that aside from all of the things that we usually see with the book in terms of the American experience or the microcosm of society found on the ship, there's a, and that's true. Like we said, that's true. There is a ship with like this multiplicity of people. We have a Kiwi cannibal. We have a Christian in Starbuck. We have all these sorts of people. We have Pip. We have all these sorts of people, but they are sort of forced to survive on the open ocean and in the what Gatsby called, or is it what Gatsby says in it's what Nick called last page of Gatsby. Actually, this is a great description for Moby Dick. He says, a fresh green breast of the new world. Right. So they're it sort of stands for the self-reliant Emersonian idea of the conquest of America and going west, young man. However, the book is really a spiritual, a Gnostic spiritual quest where we have Ahab, who is this satanic figure. He's purely Miltonian. He's just like in Paradise Lost. He's also mythical, like he's a Greek mythic hero. He's like a Festus laboring under the volcano, forging his harpoon. He's got a peg leg. It's interesting that he has a peg leg. He's lame, just like a Festus / Vulcan, right? And his entire reason for existence is to wreak havoc, to seek out this white whale, this Leviathan, and to destroy it as revenge for what it has taken from him. Now, it becomes, because of the language in the text, it becomes a more than a revenge story, where you have this almost comical, like comic book peg leg, classical archetypal captain figure, right, with the beard and the hat and all that. The book really brings out this idea of the sort of Luciferian anti-hero who is trying to break on through to the other side by destroying the demiurge, and the white whale is the symbol of the demiurge, right? And notice at the end of the book, I mean, everything about the book screams that. Right. The language is written purposefully with that in mind. And a lot of people will say that, like, oh, Moby Dick is like an Old Testament work of prose, forgetting about the New Testament aspects of the story, and how remember at the end of the book, there's this lone survivor who survives floating, he's floating on wood, right? And the way he survived was by listening to what's the guy's name? His prophecy came true, how he would survive by his own death. I forget. But we have this one guy who goes back to tell the story of the rest of the journey. And in the end, I mean, the question becomes, in the end, like, does the lone survivor, does Ishmael, is he delivered? He's delivered literally, he lives, but is he delivered in terms of, does he find any salvation, right, from this like hellscape that he's just taken part in? Mm-hmm. And we know that, Ahab's eventual end is that he is unified with this Leviathan. They're literally unified, right? And he baptizes. He uses the language of baptism. He continuously says he baptizes his harpoon in fire. He blesses it. He literally blesses it in the name of the devil. He has a Latin invocation to Satan when he's when he's baptizing his harpoon, and the imagery is so profound and so infernal throughout the book that it's amazing that this is the great American novel, and right,
yeah,
and like, for instance, one thing that I've been thinking of since yesterday was I remember somebody's comment about like, how come they said, for instance, how come the Western artists or the Western writers are more prolific than the Orthodox? And I thought we sort of had this discussion, and I thought, like, what is that? What do you mean by their output? Use the term output, and what does that mean? Their output, because I think that there are a number of things that go into that. And first of all, the reason that the output, as one would say, is more is because of, number one, the people that control the actual physical output to people. So for example, if you're going to say that Beethoven had more output, right? Well, it doesn't mean that Beethoven was creating more work of any kind than, let's say, someone in the East or Orthodox. Right. It means that he was patronized by a Lutheran court. Was Beethoven Lutheran? He was patronized by I believe so. By a royal court that literally decides what's going to be put out. Right? If you are a visual artist now in New York, do you think that the interest has anything to do? I mean, the interests are either purely financial or cultural creation, and they are put out by certain firms and publishing houses. So that's one aspect. The other is, what's the difference? Like, what do you have to define output in terms of, are you comparing like paintings and visual works with icons? I don't think that it's not the same universe. It's not the same world. So I'm not really sure about that. But I would say that I mean, in terms of output, some of the output and being prolific. We talked in one of my earlier streams about I met the American poet laureate Robert Pinsky when I was in 11th grade in school. He's the guy who, we have, this is April and it's National Poetry Month. He's the one who's responsible for that. Oh, and it's, Shakespeare's birthday on April and death on April 23rd. So that's another reason. But Robert Pinsky, I met him at a reading and I asked him, like what he thought of, I was a teenager. So I asked him what he thought of like the Beat generation and Beat literature. And his answer like sort of confounded me. I was like angry at his answer that day. He said, what difference does it make? There's good and there's bad, right? There's good writing and there's bad writing. So the Beat generation is like this, and the great writing is this, and the bad writing is this. Yeah. And I was like, what does that mean? Man, why can't you just like Jack Kerouac, But then I thought about that, and he was totally right. The canon of literature consists of like, there isn't, I mean, look, I've got a Norton Anthology in front. This is the Norton Anthology of English literature. Okay. This is what you would get if you were at university right now. You would get this. And it's about, I don't know, it's almost 3,000 pages. Now, that sounds like a lot. Okay. But it's not really. Right. It's not really a lot. It's synthesized down to the great works. And the bad works are like infinitely more than this. So in terms of output, I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, as far as like, I don't know. I think that in terms of like, for instance, iconography, right? The point is not the prolific, splotching a painting on a canvas to sell, right? It's a window. Right. So I don't know. I'm kind of babbling on.
Well, I think also there's a language difference there. So there's always been this sort of cultural barrier between the East and the West. So when you talk about orthodoxy, you're talking about all these different cultures that that have different languages, and so you showed the Anthology of English Literature, and really that's localized then with like French works and German works and English works, and that's really about it. And so when you start looking into some of the great Russian or Romanian or Greek, I mean, really we know Greece hasn't done a whole lot, in the more recent times, no shots intended, but so I think there's definitely a translation, problem there because, especially from the Russian, it's just more difficult. But in regards to that, just quick side note, have you read The Master Margarita?
Yes, Bulgakov. Yep.
Yeah, we should do together another stream doing a Bazed Lit analyzation of The Master Margarita, because I think there's a lot in there to glean and interpret and reorient in a sort of logos. I mean, that's a major criticism of the Soviet Union and communism and how it is paradoxically provides the exact opposite of what it says it's going to do.
Right. Yeah. I think that Russian literature itself is so, it has a completely, how would I describe it? Almost the entire tone is so different from, for example, I mean, it's almost incomparable. It's hard to compare, for instance, 19th century Russian literature and 19th century British literature.
Right.
The two are completely
different worlds. I mean, in the 19th
totally
century, Russia's now getting railroads. And in the 19th century Europe, they're looking to do away with religion and, and go to the opium dens and write and get intoxicated and progress, the new world, money. It's like, they're two different worlds.
Yeah, I was reading, what was I reading? So the Victorian, essentially the Victorian era in English literature, which is 1837 to 1901. That's the reign of Queen Victoria. It's the Victorian era is such a dominating era in terms of our own ideas, especially here about Western ideology, and is so integral to where we see ourselves even now in terms of geopolitics.
Yep.
That it's
major.
It's almost incomparable with anything else.
Yep.
I mean,
that 19th century was the revival of occultism, spiritism, mesmerism, all this different stuff was revived, and so all the traditionality was put away for the new era. That's what the spirit of the time was.
Yes, and obviously the criticism of the neoclassical era and the Enlightenment, as the sort of origin for where we are now is absolutely valid, but I think that when one considers the Victorian ethos and what led to in the grand chessboard and colonialism and the like you said the emphasis on the occult and spiritism and then onto scientism, scientism, and I always think of the one thing that sums up the Victorian era for me is that 1888 Jack the Ripper quote, right? One day people will look back and say, I gave birth to the 20th century, which is so perfect and is so poetic and so perfect in so many ways because, I don't know, Jack the Ripper, Freemasons, the idea of him being Prince Albert.
Theosophy. That theosophy gets going at that time. Major impact on world spirituality and religion.
Absolutely. Blavatsky, Crowleyanism.
Crowley's into the 19th century.
Right. So I think that, it's interesting just to compare the two because even just the very basic idea, the surface level, sun never setting on the British Empire and people considering that. I think a lot of people in terms of the historical element, purely, people really forget the concept of what the British Empire and what literature being a product in many ways like a propagandistic product of the exporting of the British
value
Pax
system,
Britannica, the value system. Yeah, is so underrated, misunderstood, and forgotten. I mean, the British Empire at one point owned, about 3/4 of the globe, right? No matter where you went, the sun never set on the British Empire, right? At one point, the United States, Canada, Australia, China, Hong Kong, India, huge swaths of Africa, South Africa, Rhodesia, all these places, the Caribbean, and that gave way to modernity, like with such a fire, right, was such a, it directly led right into the 20th century. And I think that it's interesting, going back to Moby Dick, that this novel sort of encapsulates this time that it takes place in the midst of the Victorian era, when they're certainly dominating whatever the United States was at that point. But it also sort of, it pre-exists what the Victorian era sort of gave life to.
Right.
And I think that that is like, that's symbolized in the crew, right? And also in the fact that they're this like little vessel floating on this like infinite ocean, right? Yeah. With this demonic Leviathan always somewhere beneath the surface, right? Right. There's always subtext. There's always something that's haunting them.
Well, and in your stream, you mentioned that, the sort of all-seeing eye is that the great white whale is underneath the surface of the water, but at the same time, Ahab is above the water in the ship and watching the crew, and sort of that, even that fracturing in the eye is indicative of, I think, evil or Satan or power being self-corruptive, and in itself being that sort of fractured mirror, because wholeness, totality can only exist in God, and this sort of anti-God endeavor leads to a sort of fracturing and a self-destruction. And I think even when, combining Moby Dick and The Great Gatsby, and this whole, the Gatsby has much more emphasis on what the West, moving west. And at that time in the 20s, there was much more optimism than in the 20s now. But you look how it feels like a lot of the momentum of society, it's now all in the East, right? It's like the old world is now, it's China, it's Russia, it's the old countries, it's the old world that, in a way, they're now the frontier. They're the new beginning. In the West, and we can see it in the values, we can see it in the postmodernism, we can see it it's self-destructive, just like Ahab and the ship and the great white whale, or Gatsby in the whole, East Egg. It seems like it's replaying itself out.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point about the new frontier. The new frontier sort of being the old frontier, being the new frontier.
And the new frontier is the old frontier. It's the East, but it's using communism. It's using technology. Right. So it's like using all these new world endeavors that in this pursuit, it's like it came up with all these accoutrements and all these tools. And yet at the same time, the frontier isn't the old, the new world. It's actually the old world using the new world technology. And like the wave is now moving again. It's moving from East to West. And this is, in a way, it's the Great Reset.
Right. I hate to quote Hunter S. Thompson, degenerate, but he does have that quote, which he actually stole completely from the Great. I don't want to say he stole it, but it's certainly, there are points in The Great Gatsby where he sort of lifted it. And he says, he's describing in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, there's a part where he's describing his view of the 60s. This is totally fake in a number of ways, but his view of the 60s is that he says there was a point, there was hope, there was whatever, and then he says, but if you climbed up high enough and you looked with like a keen enough eye, you could see the crest of a high and beautiful wave, right? So he's seeing like his cultural movement in the 60s, ebb and flow, and then finally recede. And again, I hate quoting Hunter S. Thompson, but it's appropriate because we're quoting when we're talking about The Great Gatsby and then Moby Dick. And people may watch this and think that those are two disparate novels, and why would there be a comparison between the two? But I think we've shown plenty of comparisons between the two, and if not, just for the fact that both sort of go into this category of the great American novel, right? It's really a triumvirate of The Great Gatsby, Moby Dick, and Huckleberry Finn. Yeah. And I think that all three have very similar themes. One of those that you just mentioned was this idea of the all-seeing eye. There's a great part in Moby Dick where Ishmael is describing the death of a whale. There are large sections of like how to whale hunt and all the like practical like elements of whale hunting. And like he says at the beginning of the book that like in the intro to that book, it talks about how whale hunting stands for like the engine of America that precedes the full-on mechanization of the Industrial Revolution. And that's an interesting concept. And I think that there's this one part where they're on the ship and he's describing the whale when they finally kill a whale, not Moby Dick, but another whale, and how the last thing that they always see is they've got this like miracle of creation, right? It's this gigantic beast that's so beautiful and that plumbs the depths of the abyss and is able to hold its breath like it's like it's literally, it's inspired by God, you know, and then it comes up and it breaches into their world, and then they kill it, just like the mariner in Coleridge killing the albatross, right? Mm-hmm. And then the last thing they see, they pierce it in its side. They pierce the whale in its side, and then the last thing that they see is this single eye that rolls. The eye looks them directly in the eye, and then it rolls backwards, and then it falls into the depths. And that to me is very similar to the all-seeing eyes that look over the Valley of Ashes in The Great Gatsby. And there's that scene where Wilson, who is who we discovered in our explication of the book that he's probably running a front. Nick refers to it specifically as that, like the garage in the Valley of Ashes from which Myrtle comes, and she's the mistress of Tom, that Tom Buchanan. He's like, there's this front, and there's this part where he pushes Myrtle's face up to the glass, and so she's looking like both at herself in the reflection and out onto the wasteland, which is an interesting image, right? Because she is a wasteland. Right. And he says, look up at those eyes. And it's the eyes of an old advertisement, and it's eyes without a face. It's just these two domineering blue eyes, like in yellow spectacles. Right.
And yellowness is a sickness, right? Eyes that are yellow absolutely. Is indicative of sickness.
Yeah, absolutely. They're like these decrepit, jaundiced, typhoid-esque eyes that are looking out. They describe the actual billboard as that the guy who put them up was an oculist who then like probably got sick and moved on and forgot about the ad, and now they're just degenerate. Mm-hmm. But Wilson says to his wife, look, no matter what you do, you can't hide from God. He's always watching you, right? And it's interesting that now like we said in the other analysis, he's a schizoid. And he goes on to assassinate Gatsby. Mm-hmm. And even the ideas of who's watching whom in the book, because everyone's watching everybody else. I mean, there are continuous scenes of Gatsby standing up. Oh, the yellow. Gatsby is standing up in the sort of battlements of his is it his house that's a like a chateau. I forget how they describe it, but he's standing up in the battlements, and like everybody else leaves the party. He's watching everybody else. Nick goes home. He looks up and he sees Gatsby in a yellow light, looking down upon his sort of weird, like demiurge creation. Yeah. Right. So yeah, I don't know.
In that Gatsby, there is no selflessness, right? Everybody's in it for themselves, which creates this disjunction, which creates this disharmony. And I remember you talked about you were reading a portion where they're talking about the only time they felt intimacy was in these ginormous parties that Gatsby would throw. So you see the paradox that they said, well, in small parties, everybody can hear. I guess there's no intimacy. Everybody can hear and see each other, and so the only time they feel intimate is being around in large groups where they blend in. And this lack of this worship of self, whether it be Ahab in the pursuit of the great whale, or it's all the protagonists and characters in Gatsby. it just ends in death and sort of self-destruction.
Absolutely.
And so you see the sort of same moral lens using Christ, using Logos, using Christianity to interpret it. You know, in a way, they're very different novels, they're very different stories, and yet at the same time, in a way, they're telling us the same thing about reality and about people.
Yes. Yeah. Ahab presides over what he sees as this vast nothingness, right? He sees humanity as a wasteland, and he has a singular motive, and he's willing to sacrifice. They mention the word sacrifice a number of times in the book, that he's willing to sacrifice his entire crew, a blood sacrifice, his entire crew in order to, and himself. And Gatsby, actually, the word sacrifice is used a couple of times. The words sacrifice, desolate, and desolation are used so many times throughout this book. There's actually a part I just opened to it on page 145 of The Great Gatsby, where it says, once in a while she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale, and yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. In other words, these two people are alone together, but they are completely apart in terms of their inner lives. They're like shells. They're like Shakespeare's mortal coil, right? And the only way that they seem to be intimate at all is like in terms of a conspiracy. Right. They want to lift themselves up by pushing down on the Orwellian faces of other people. They're not interested in bringing up others with them.
No.
At the end of the chapter, it says about Gatsby, he put his hands in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly to the scrutiny of the house, as though my presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. Mm-hmm. It's just nothingness, right? It's just nothingness throughout.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Again, that sort of self-worship, the worship of one's own interests. In both instances, it leads to self-destruction. It leads to death.
Yes.
We see the chaos in East and West Egg. We see the chaos on the ship. And that's what we're talking about with Gatsby. There is no redemptive figure. There is no selflessness. There is no, again, the whole concept of the Trinity, the whole concept of Christ, the whole concept of the Logos is doing things not for self but for something else. And you see the opposite of that in both figures in Moby Dick and The Great Gatsby. And so, in a way, like you said, it's not that, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and from my understanding, he wanted to be impart a lot of these elite, wealthy parties when he was alive. And so he was kind of pursuing that. So it's not like he was driven by writing a book that lays out this fine moral compass and critique of society. It's that maybe he was accurate in his description and using literary techniques and archetypes to describe the world, that then from a perception of Logos and Christ, you then see why it's useful, why it's good, but it's not that he did it. It's not that it was his moral compass.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right, especially about your interpretation of Fitzgerald himself. He was, he went to Yale, and yet he didn't fit in enough with the people that he went to school with. It's kind of like Tom. It's just like Tom and Nick in The Great Gatsby, where they both went to Yale, right? Mm-hmm. They both should be on this weird playing field, except for Nick is never going to be a part of what Tom's part of.
Right.
And Fitzgerald himself, he says literally that he joined the war. He was in the Great War. He went there and he got sent to the front so that he could die. He wanted that. His whole time, Hemingway writes about this in A Movable Feast, that he could never understand Fitzgerald because, everybody sort of fit into their niche, and everybody they all had their own thing. I mean, James Joyce wasn't, he was living in Paris at the time. James Joyce wasn't.
Yeah, he liked his prostitutes. He
Yes,
came across oral sex for the first time in Paris.
Right. Yeah. So James Joyce and Ezra Pound and all these guys, I mean, they were doing their thing, doing whatever they were doing, all that stuff. But Fitzgerald, he could never get a handle on Fitzgerald because Fitzgerald was like, I want to learn to write from you guys. And I want to hang out with you, but just enough so that I can get some champagne, some opium, and hang out with, and hang out with Zelda and hopefully make it to the, I don't know, the party at Buckingham Palace or whatever it was that he wanted to go to, or probably to the Dutroux Castle or whatever. Right. And that Hemingway could never, Hemingway always thought that he was effeminate, right? That he didn't have like a handle on himself. Now, of course, I have my own thoughts and theories about Hemingway and his own proclivities, but yeah, you're exactly right. There's this idea of not fitting in and describing pretty accurately a worldview, like a book, a life where there is like this alienation, but like you said, in death or oblivion. A lot of these characters in these books wish specifically and purposefully for oblivion. They want oblivion. They will say that. Yes, thank you guys. Appreciate that. Thank you. Shout out to all the people that came here for the stream. I love you guys. And I'm just going to say while I can, shout out, thank you so much to DPH. I really appreciate you having me on. And this has been a really good time. So I really appreciate you. And thank you to everybody who's supported. And you guys, don't forget, send those super chats in to our friend David Patrick Harry here. Super chats via Streamlabs.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, brother. And we should probably hit those up about now because I was going to try to make it to church. But, the way that I always saw F. Scott Fitzgerald was in a way he sort of embodied that American spirit of why people came to the continent to sort of make it. And so in a way, he's describing the reality he encounters as he tries to make it. Yes. And that's what The Great Gatsby is it's encountering a real phenomenon in the United States. And so it's like now you see this playing out in regards to old money. You could look at these sort of institutional figures like the Pelosi's and the Bidens and these again many ties to these, because I know Pelosi's in San Francisco, whatever, but tied to these old world power structures, believing themselves almost be royalty. And I don't just mean to limit it. Obviously, they're kind of pawns in the game. I'm not trying to act like they have a bunch of power in to some degree. But then you see Silicon Valley and like the end of this sort of Western expansion of the American spirit. I believe that's why the 60s revolution, everything happened in California, and then they built up the technology, and the technology then spread back around the world. And so, yeah, I always saw F. Scott Fitzgerald just sort of addressing and highlighting that American spirit. And then at the same time, Melville's highlighting something that's very American. Like both those books can't really be written anywhere else. The sort of the ability for Nick or the ability for F. Scott to even get into those circles, that's not how it worked in Europe. Everybody kind of stayed in their social strata, where America like promised this opportunity to move and move through different social stratas.
Yeah, I think that even the idea of the old money and the power structure has its own sort of disparate circles, and then we obviously know about circles within circles. And you mentioned, prominent families that have various interests and that have continued. I mean, look at the Bushes, right? Look at Prescott Bush.
Exactly. Prescott Bush. Exactly.
Yeah,
so
right. Prescott Bush, obviously, like to me, when I was reading the Great Gatsby, actually, Prescott Bush sort of loomed large throughout this book, because I kept thinking about his interests on Wall Street, his, pre-World War II interests and what we know about them and all that. But I also think of something, an idea. My own idea of this book is also sort of, I think, my own internal take on this book is a little bit different than I think other people's experiences, in that there are, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but there are places in society, there are certain levels of society where people would think that if you are the controller of a certain level, like a certain strata, that you are this ostentatious, Tom Buchanan figure. And that may be the case. I mean, that is the case in a number of ways.
Right.
But their view of those people is sort of more of a new money idea of how they are.
Right.
And so in actuality, the way of looking at Tom Buchanan in this book from today's perspective is that really Tom Buchanan is kind of a new money figure.
Mm-hmm.
And that Gatsby is a sort of new money figure.
Right.
Okay. And what I mean by that
he's
is
the American money figure.
Yes.
Tom's like new money in the sense of that European bridge into the new world. Gatsby is the self-made man in the new world.
Right. And one of the ideas that is not often, one of the aspects of this that's not often covered, Jay covered it when he talked about the Anglo-American establishment and the Round Table Group, is that a lot of these people who are truly at the pinnacle of this thing are people that, I mean, for one thing, there's a reason why the ROTHS childs own, the Financial Times, right? Because it makes sure that they're never on the cover, right? But in a sort of American, specifically American idea of that, I mean, I have a friend. Listen, folks, I'm not bragging, but I have a friend who is the great grandson of the co-founder of Standard Oil. Okay. And I'm not going to name him. You can Google
you're a
this
member of the Rockefeller Foundation. That's what you're trying to
tell us. So here's what people don't know this. This is what happened actually, that when Standard Oil was founded, there were two people. There was Rockefeller and the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
And the other guy who you can look up, the other guy is the guy who ran the business. Okay. And Rockefeller is sort of not the front man, but he's like, it's his company, it's his driving force. But the other guy is the guy who was the co-founder and ran it and was the money man.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happened during the expansion of Standard Oil. And that was that the other guy's wife got sick. I think she got tuberculosis, and they had to move her to Florida, like to a warmer clime, essentially. And when that happened, he went down to Florida and he founded the railroads in Florida. He built Palm Beach, he built Miami, he built St. Augustine, and he stayed down there and then split from the company.
Mm.
And you never hear about this guy because his whole point was that I'm not like judging or saying that this guy is like some saint. I'm saying that his thing was different from the other thing. And that family continued to live the way they did, but eventually they moved on to where I grew up. And the reason they moved there was because at the time, the son of, what's the pilot's name who got, what's his name? The famous pilot in the 1920s whose son was Kidnapped. Guys, what's the name of the famous pilot? Anyway, what's the guy's name? I'm in a total thing. Okay. Anyway, what somebody will say it in the chat. The famous pilot in the 1920s who flew the first transatlantic flight. And his kid,
Charles Lindbergh.
Yes, Lindbergh. Thank you. Sorry, Lindbergh. When the Lindbergh kidnapping happened, all of those people were afraid that was going to happen to them, and so they moved. They moved. A bunch of them, including the guy I know's family, moved out of New York, moved out of Florida, and came to another place. And you would never believe, if you met this guy, that he was that this was his family. You would never believe it. You would never know. He's just a normal dude, right? Like drives like a Wagoneer. He doesn't drive like a Porsche or whatever.
Right.
But But incredibly, that's his family. And I think that there are aspects of now that people really, in terms of, illusion versus reality, that people have no idea of how the surface level can contrast with the things that people control or are capable of or what they do. And I think that that's one aspect that the Great Gatsby sort of gets pretty well. Like you were saying, when you were talking about when you were talking about Fitzgerald's impressions of how the world works and society that he would want to be part of or whatnot. Anyway, that was a weird story.
No, dude, that is great. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, everybody, go subscribe to Bazed Lit Analyzer. Again, that title is up above here on the Zoom, so you can see that, and then just go search it on YouTube and give him a sub. We're going to hit these super chats real quick, so I apologize if we don't spend as much time. We're going to try to get through them very quickly. So, again, thank you, everybody. Please smash that like. Great appreciation to everybody who's joined us today. First super chat comes from Slow Boy Whiteboard. Kristen throws in $10 and says, thanks for the quality content. God bless you both and everyone in the chat. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. God bless you and your family, fellow Hoosier. And I know that she's still listening. At least I saw her in the chat here a few minutes ago. So God bless Kristen and her family. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope your husband's still enjoying the local barber. Actually, I need to go there soon, so maybe I'll see him there. Next super chat comes from Elena Orthodox Deserter Rose. She throws in €5 or pounds. I'm not sure which one that is. And says, congrats to the amazing Henley for reaching, as of this moment, 208 subs. Well, let's see what you have now. If we fresh over there, you got 229. Everybody go over to Bazed Lit Analyzer and subscribe. See if we can try to get you up to 250 here in the next few days. So everybody go to Bazed Lit Analyzer. He's at 230 and subscribe to him. So mods, if you guys can share that link. His YouTube link is in the video description, but mods, feel free to share his YouTube link so anybody watching or on the replay can click that. So thank you very much, Elena. She says, congrats to the amazing Henley for reaching, as of this moment, 200 and now 30 subs. So thank you so much, Elena, for your support. And again, congratulations to Henley and his channel. It's a great success. And then Ortho brother here that we definitely know, Jethro, throws in the very generous $30. Jethro throws in $30 and says, thank you so much for your content, King. So thank you so much, Jethro. Really appreciate that. And thanks for all you do for the community. You're like a head mod in like every main YouTube Orthodox group. So shout out to Jethro. That man stays active on the YouTube live chats. No doubt about that. So shout out to Jethro. Really appreciate you, brother. All the support. Always kicking out the trolls. God bless you, man. God bless you. Next one comes from the Green Feathers. He says, God bless you guys. Well, thank you so much, the Green Feathers. God bless you, brother. God bless your beautiful family. Hope your arthritis is doing better. And blessed Holy Week. Really appreciate all your support. Nick of the Green Feathers, really, really big supporter, continual supporter of here at Church of the Eternal Logos. So thank you so much, Nick and the Green Feathers. Johnny throws in $3 and says, please point me in the direction of someone who has done a symbolic / real world analysis of The Giver book or movie. So I get that'd be directed to you. It sounds like I don't even know.
Right, Lois Lowry. Mm-hmm. Yep.
You want to give him?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, go ahead. He says, point me in the direction of someone who has done a symbolic real world. So you're saying you'll do that maybe?
Sure. Yeah, I can work on that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I know that worked pretty well. I think Jay has talked about The Giver. He hasn't done a specific analysis, especially of the film, but he has talked about it in relation to other dystopian works. But yeah, I would love to do an analysis of that book. Yeah.
Excellent. So Johnny, make sure you go sub over to Bazed Lit Analyzer. Get those subs up, folks. Yeah, you're at 230. We guys, we need 20 more subs over there at least. So go over to Bazed Lit Analyzer and subscribe, and he will. So Johnny, who throws in the $3, go subscribe to Bazed Lit Analyzer's channel, and he will do you for your attention given on today's stream. He will do you a special stream on the Giver. So look out for that. Next super chat comes from Tuck Johnson, throws in $7 and says, who's the best American novelist of the last 50 years? Haven't read him in a decade, but used to love John Irving. Very talented writer, but in retrospect, his stuff is packed with boomer morality and pitfalls. So you want to take that one?
Yeah, you hit that one on the head for sure. Yeah, no, that was a good, fine question. I appreciate it, and I definitely appreciate your interpretation of John Irving. The best novelist in the last 50 years, the greatest novelist.
American novelist,
Yeah, I mentioned Don DeLeo. I think Don DeLeo is probably. I'm surprised, not that winning a Nobel Prize matters. That's a globalist award, but I would say that I'm surprised that he hasn't won it. And that I would say Don DeLeo, DeLillo, Don DeLeo is probably the greatest American novelist of the last, of the last 50 years. I would put him pretty definitively in that. So that was a good question though. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tuck Johnson. I think this is your first time supporting Church of the Eternal Logos. So thank you very much, brother. I hope you enjoyed the stream, and God bless you and yours. And then this is the last super chat. Comes from Jared Fetzer. I know Jared, good guy. God bless you and your family, brother. Hope everybody's doing well. He says, shout out to you, DPH and great analysis, or DPH great analysis. The Great Gatsby to me seems to be a critique of capitalistic despotism and how money just makes people more obsessive.
I would say that's true on a level. I would say yes. I would say that's a fine interpretation, and that's a valid and fine interpretation of the Great Gatsby. But like we said in the stream, I think that money is the people in the book especially are motivated by things greater than money, bigger than money. And I think that that certainly plays a part in in the despotic nature of the elites, but they are certainly motivated by more than money. And it's interesting that a lot of the material wealth that's described in The Great Gatsby, and that it's actually known for. When people think of Gatsby, they think of like material wealth. But like we said if you want to check out my Great Gatsby stream over on my channel, we talked about how it's not an accident that a certain Jeff Stein Effrey seems to have been modeled completely on Gatsby. And that I would say that the things that are more important or more integral to the system deal with BLACKMAIL and traffic ING and the continuation of the power structure itself. I mean, it's no accident that, like, even the cover of the book, which was approved by Fitzgerald himself, right, is a carnival.
Yeah, it's sick eyes. Yeah,
that's right, with all-seeing eyes watching over it. So
deathly eyes, though. I mean, it's not even like
that. Oh, absolutely. Look, with the yellow. That's right.
So that does the super chats. So guys, thank you so much. Let me give a special shout out again to Kristen of Slowboy Whiteboard. We love you. We appreciate you. God bless you and your family. Special thank you to Elena, Orthodox Deserter Rose or Desert Rose. I apologize. Not sure how to exactly pronounce that. Thank you so much for your support. A very, very special shout out to Jethro. Shout out to Jethro and all the work he does for the community. God bless you, brother. I hope you're doing well. Shout out to the Green Feathers, another great, another brother here in the Ortho online community. Shout out to Johnny Shout out to, and Johnny, make sure to go subscribe over to Bazed Lit Analyzer. Everybody go to Bazed Lit Analyzer and subscribe right now. And then Tuck Johnson, thank you very much for your support. And last but certainly not least, Jared Fetzer, thank you so much, brother, for your support. And that does all the super chats. You want to leave anybody with any message before we hop off here?
I would love to. I would love to give a shout out to all of the people that you just mentioned that were so generous in supporting the stream. And I would like to give a special thank you and a shout out, yes, to all my friends, all my homies, especially Jethro, Jerry, Mixkey, Nate, OK, Eliana, Kristen, and ADH, a devotional heart.
Is it Eliana?
Everybody.
Oh, I call her Elena.
Beautiful Eliana.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful Eliana and Kristen at Slow Boy Whiteboard and TGF. All of my friends. You guys are so generous, full of love, so smart, and such a great people to know. And I'm honored and thank you very much. And especially, of course, I'd like to give a special thank you and shout out to our homeboy here, DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos. We love you, and I thank you so much for having me on the stream. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to get to have this conversation that we did. I personally and everybody I know that we all get so much out of your content, so much out of your streams. You do such amazing research. Everybody appreciates that, and really, I've learned so much from you and from all of the content that you produce, and I really appreciate it. Oh boy, thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Again, I'll be watching your streams. I really appreciate your work. Again, everybody go subscribe to Bazed Lit Analyzer. And I do think we're going to have to do, we'll have to do our own Bazed Lit analysis of the Master and Margarita. Therefore, we can do a little Eastern 20th century literature right there, 1940s Russia. And kind of glean a text that talks about magic and Satan, the devil, communism, society, and a sort of Stalinistic Soviet Union. So we'll plan that in the future. So again, thank you everybody very, very much. God bless everybody. Shout out to all the supporters, and make sure you go subscribe to Bazed Lit Analyzer.